My husband and I had been married for 7 years. We finally had our first child. When I shared the pregnancy results, full of joy, he frowned and asked whose child it was. I froze.
Of course it's yours, I said.
We have been married for 7 years without any children. I went on a business trip for 2 months, and now you're pregnant? Are you joking? Hearing those words left me stunned. I was 2 months pregnant. The timing didn't match. Lucia, Guillermo's mother, mocked from the side. Is that why you go out so often at night? Are you having an affair with another man? Esteban used to go out at night because he worked overtime, and those accusations made me so angry that I almost lost my composure. In the end, I tried to remain calm and told Guillermo, if you don't believe me, then let's do a paternity test. Unexpectedly, Guillermo agreed. The disappointment I felt was so deep that I decided to go to my parents' house after taking the test. The results would be ready in 3 days. Guillermo and I agreed to go to the hospital together to get them. If the child was his, he would apologize to me. If it wasn't, he would divorce me, and I would have to leave the house. During those 3 days, Guillermo didn't contact me. I was so sad that I told my mother, Clara, that when the results came out, I planned to abort the baby and divorce Guillermo. She advised me to give him another chance. Guillermo loves you. He hasn't had a child for so long, and he never said anything. It's normal for him to have doubts when you suddenly become pregnant. Wait and see. When the results come out, he will apologize to you. She was right. Although Guillermo could be temperamental, he always showed me his love. I decided to listen to my mother and give him another chance. On the day the results came out, I overslept. When I was ready to leave, the doorbell rang. It was Guillermo standing outside. I thought he had come to pick me up after seeing the results and was about to apologize for his mistake. Did you read the results? I asked. I hadn't finished speaking when Guillermo, visibly angry, reacted in a way that deeply surprised me. Without further explanation, he began yelling at me, his words filled with accusations. He showed me his phone, where I saw messages from Marta Gonzalez, a friend of his from college. Marta had told him that Eduardo, a colleague of mine, and I were seeing each other. At first, Guillermo didn't believe her, but Marta sent him a photo of some underwear that looked familiar to me. I had worn it the night before Guillermo left on his business trip. I tried to explain. Guillermo, those aren't my underwear. But he, increasingly agitated, refused to listen. If they're not yours, then whose are they? He asked insistently. I realized that this might have something to do with Lucia. I quickly remembered that Lucia had a habit of taking my clothes without my permission. Once, I came home early from work and found her in my bedroom, saying she had mistaken the room. After she left, I found a piece of lingerie on the floor that wasn't mine. Could it be that Lucia was involved? Carefully, I looked up and said to Guillermo, I know it was your mother. Guillermo became even more furious. How dare you slander my mother? She's a decent woman, he exclaimed. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. My mother, hearing the argument, rushed out of her room to intervene. Please, Guillermo, sit down and talk calmly. There must be a misunderstanding, my mother said, trying to calm him down. But Guillermo, full of rage, wasn't willing to listen. In the middle of the argument, my mother was pushed, and the atmosphere became even tenser. Some neighbors began gathering in front of the house, worried about the heated argument. What's going on here? They murmured. It seems that Ricardo's daughter cheated on her husband, one of them said. I don't believe it. Ricardo is a decent man. How could he have raised a daughter like that? Another commented. As the crowd kept speculating, Carlos, one of the neighbors, couldn't stand it anymore and approached. Young man, calm down. You can't do this. She's still pregnant, Carlos said, trying to mediate. Guillermo glared at him. This is none of your business. It's a family matter, he replied coldly. Despite his harsh words, Carlos's intervention and the presence of the neighbors made Guillermo back down a little. People began to step away, and the atmosphere became slightly less tense. Isabel, did you cheat on me and expect me to raise your child? Guillermo looked at me with a deep expression of anger, his words filled with contempt. I had never seen him so furious. His eyes reflected a mixture of pain and fury that seemed impossible to calm. Instinctively, I covered my belly and softened my tone, trying to reason with him. I didn't do anything wrong, Guillermo. If you don't believe me, you can call Eduardo and ask him about all of this. Guillermo let out a cold laugh. You say his name so fondly. Do you want him to come and save you? Well, that's not going to happen. I've already taken care of everything, he said, making it clear that he had no intention of listening to reason. He picked up an old wooden shovel that was leaning against the wall and held it in his hand, threateningly, while he continued questioning me. When exactly did you get involved with Eduardo? He asked, not giving me a chance to speak. I shook my head. I'm not with him, I repeated, my voice breaking. Guillermo approached me, and I closed my eyes, expecting the worst. But instead of feeling any pain, I heard my mother's voice as she stepped between us. She shielded me and spoke directly to Guillermo. You're mistaken about Isabel. Please don't continue with this. You two should sit down and talk calmly. If you continue like this, you'll regret it. I should have done this before, Guillermo murmured, his voice full of resentment. Clara, you always tell me to be good to her. Why don't you teach her how to behave? My mother, bravely, hugged me to protect me while Guillermo continued his verbal outburst. I heard the pain in my mother's voice, and my heart filled with anguish. To protect my mother, I set aside my pride and begged desperately. Guillermo, please, enough. Don't do this anymore. After everything Guillermo had done, I sat on the floor, trembling with fear and pain. My mother, Clara, hugged me, trying to offer me comfort. Guillermo was completely out of control, making baseless accusations, and yet, he wouldn't stop. I could feel the tension growing in the room, and my mother also knew the situation was dangerous. We needed to get out of there, but we didn't know how. It was then, suddenly, that we heard a loud knock on the door. It was my father, Ricardo, a police officer who had always been our security. As soon as he entered, he looked at me and then at Guillermo, and his expression turned serious. My father was a respected man, and even without saying a word, his mere presence imposed authority. Guillermo took a step back, hesitating. Guillermo, leave this house right now, my father ordered firmly. I knew he was trying to stay calm, but I could also see his concern and anger at what he was witnessing. Guillermo, however, was blinded by rage. She cheated on me, Ricardo. She has to learn what it means to be a liar, he shouted, without caring about the surroundings, the neighbors watching, my mother who was hurt, or me. My mother, though she was also emotionally hurt, stood up and faced Guillermo. You don't know what you're talking about, she said firmly, trying to protect me and the baby I was carrying. But Guillermo didn't want to listen, and with every word my mother said, he seemed to get even more agitated. Ricardo, realizing that Guillermo wasn't going to calm down, made a decision that no one expected. He stepped forward, stood between Guillermo and me, and raised his voice. You have 1 minute to leave this house, or I'll call the police. I'm serious. There was something in my father's voice that made Guillermo hesitate. For the first time, I saw something in Guillermo's eyes, a flicker of doubt or perhaps fear. After a moment of tension, Guillermo shook his head and threw the shovel to the ground with a thud that echoed throughout the room. He looked at me one last time, full of bitterness, then turned and left. The door slammed shut behind him, and everything went quiet. As soon as he left, I felt my body collapse, as if all the tension from the past few days had finally dissipated. My legs gave out, and my mother held me, helping me sit down in a chair. My father stood next to us, looking at me with concern and sadness. It's all right now, Isabel. He's gone, my father said, trying to calm me down. In the days that followed, I stayed at my parents' house. It was strange being there after so much time away, but it was the only place where I felt safe. Every night, I struggled not to think about what had happened, about Guillermo's words, about the way he looked at me and treated me. The man I loved, who promised to protect me, had turned into someone I couldn't recognize. I decided I couldn't leave things like that. Guillermo needed to understand what he had done and face the consequences of his actions. That's why I contacted a lawyer. My father, who supported me in everything, helped me prepare the documents to file for divorce. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I knew Guillermo wouldn't take the separation well, but I needed to think about myself and my child. It was at that moment when Marta, Guillermo's supposed friend, showed up at my parents' house. I still felt fragile, but I knew I needed to confront her. I needed to understand why she had done what she did. When I opened the door, there she was, standing there with a cold smile on her lips, as if all of this was a game to her. "You are never good enough for Guillermo," she said, crossing her arms, her tone full of arrogance. "He deserves someone better, someone who understands him, like me." And then everything made sense. Marta didn't just want to destroy my marriage, she wanted Guillermo for herself. She planted doubts, fueled his jealousy, and succeeded in turning the man I loved into someone unrecognizable. I looked at her for a moment, trying to control the fury that was growing inside me. I took a deep breath, and instead of responding in the same tone, I simply said, "You got what you wanted, Marta. I hope he's worth it." And I closed the door. There was nothing more to say. I was tired of so much hatred, so much pain. In the days that followed, I did everything possible to focus on myself and my baby. Even though Guillermo and Marta had destroyed what I thought was a happy future, I knew I still had myself, and I had my family by my side. And most importantly, I had a child on the way, someone who would need me more than anything. One day, while I was in the garden of my parents' house, I saw a car stop on the other side of the street. Guillermo got out of the car, hesitating. He looked different, as if something had changed since the last time we saw each other. He approached the fence, and for a moment, I thought he might come to apologize. "Isabel, we need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. But I knew there was nothing more to say. I had given him the chance to listen to me, to believe in me, and he chose not to. I just shook my head. "There's nothing more to say, Guillermo. I hope you find what you're looking for." He stood there for a moment, looking at me as if he wanted to say something more, but then he turned and left. As I watched him walk away, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for what we had lost, for the love that once existed between us, and relief because, finally, I was ready to move on. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and difficulties, but there was also hope. I had my family and a new beginning in sight. Guillermo and Marta might have won a battle, but my life was far from over. I had so much to live for, and above all, I had a child who deserved a future full of love and peace. As the months passed, I began to rebuild my life from scratch. I sought support from my closest friends and my family, who had always been there for me. I went to therapy, not only to heal the wounds that Guillermo had left in me, but also to learn to be strong for the baby that was on the way. I knew I couldn't let resentment and pain control my life. I wanted to be a loving mother and, above all, set the best example possible of how to overcome adversity with dignity. When my child was finally born, I felt a love I had never experienced before. Holding him in my arms, I realized that this little human being was the reason I had endured all that pain. His innocent face filled me with determination. Guillermo and Marta were part of the past. Now, my priority was my child and giving him a life full of happiness. And so, I began to write a new chapter in my life. With every smile for my son, every little achievement, I reminded myself that everything I had been through had made me stronger. I stopped thinking about Guillermo and what had been, and instead I started focusing on what could be. Life was full of new possibilities, and I was ready to embrace them all. After everything that happened with Guillermo, I decided that the only way to protect myself and my child was to disappear. The pain and humiliation I had experienced were still so present that I knew the best thing to do was to vanish without leaving a trace. Guillermo wasn't just full of anger. He was unpredictable, and the fear that he might find me, or worse, find my child, was enough to make me leave everything behind. Even though my father insisted on reporting Guillermo and bringing him to justice, I didn't have the strength. I knew that such a public process would bring a level of exposure and emotional exhaustion that I wasn't ready for. I was tired, hurt, and above all, I was scared. Scared that he would try to take revenge, scared that his rage would turn against my family or even against my baby, who had nothing to do with any of it. So, with the support of my mother, Clara, we packed our bags and left for a distant city, a place where no one knew us and where we could start over in peace. It was a difficult period. During the first few months, I constantly felt on the verge of a breakdown, looking over my shoulder, fearing that Guillermo would show up at any moment. Even the sound of the doorbell made me feel on edge. But little by little, I began to get my life back on track, rebuilding each piece of what had been broken. I found a simple job, but it allowed me to pay the bills and provide a decent life for myself and my child. I also began making friends in the neighborhood. They weren't deep friendships like the ones I had in the past, as there was a part of me that remained closed, a part that was always protected. I never told anyone what had happened. I just said that I was starting over, that I was looking for a better life for myself and my child. That was enough for the curious, and those who became my friends respected my space. The years went by, and I began to realize that the Isabel who endured abuse and believed Guillermo's lies no longer existed. I had rebuilt myself in a way that he could never reach again. Guillermo became just a shadow in the past, a ghost that sometimes appeared in my nightmares, but that I had learned to face and overcome. I still had fear, of course. Certain situations, like hearing a loud argument or a very aggressive tone of voice, made me recoil, and I knew there were scars that might never fully disappear. Then, one ordinary day, while I was at home watching television, something happened that took me by surprise. Guillermo's face appeared on the screen, accompanied by a headline. My stomach turned, and for a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The news said that Guillermo had been arrested for assaulting Marta. He had gone so far as to injure her severely, and she had to be taken to the hospital. Neighbors gave interviews, saying that the screams from that house were frequent, that Guillermo's behavior had become increasingly unstable in recent times. For a moment, I stood there, frozen. I should have felt relieved, should have felt that justice had finally been done, but all I felt was a mixture of emotions that left me confused. It was as if part of me was happy, as if finally something was balanced in the universe. Guillermo had destroyed so much, my confidence, my peace, the idea I had of what love was, and now he was being held accountable for his actions. However, I also felt a deep sadness. This was the man I had loved, with whom I had planned to have a family, and now he was completely lost. At that moment, my son entered the room. With his cheerful voice, he asked what we were having for dinner. I looked at him, and when I saw his innocent little face, I felt a wave of peace wash over me. I turned off the television and knelt down to hug him. Nothing else mattered now. Guillermo was part of the past, a past I had no intention of revisiting. My life, my present, was right in front of me, and I had no more reason to look back. Life went on, and a few years later, something unexpected happened. I met Alejandro. When I met him, I was distant, closed off to any kind of romantic relationship. I had promised myself that I would never again let anyone get that close to me, but Alejandro was different. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't ask too many questions, and his affection was so sincere and caring that, little by little, he broke down the walls I had built around me. At first, I was scared. I was afraid that by allowing him to get close, I was repeating the mistakes of the past. But Alejandro always respected my boundaries, and over time, I felt safe enough to share parts of my story. He listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything. He was simply there to support me. It was exactly what I needed. Alejandro met my son, and I watched, nervous about what might happen. My son was the center of my world, and anyone who didn't accept him would have no place in our lives. But to my surprise and relief, Alejandro and my son got along from the beginning. Alejandro treated him with genuine care, without forcing anything, just being himself. Over time, this relationship grew and strengthened. He helped him with his homework, played ball in the yard, and the two of them laughed together at things only they understood. One day, amidst laughter on the living room floor, my son called Alejandro Dad. It was something that happened naturally, without pressure. I turned around, surprised, expecting to see an uncomfortable reaction from Alejandro, but He just smiled and continued playing. At that moment, I knew I had found someone who not only loved me but also loved my son as if he were his own. Today, Alejandro and I have a solid relationship built on respect, trust, and true love. He knows my story and understands the scars I carry. He knows there were moments of deep pain, times when I thought I could never open up to someone else again. And yet, he helped me rebuild a future where those scars are not marks of weakness, but proof of everything I have managed to overcome. My son is now growing up surrounded by love, in a safe home with parents who love him unconditionally. Alejandro is a true father to him, and although they don't share the same blood, that never mattered. They have a special bond, something that makes me believe that destiny brought us together in the right way. Sometimes, I see the two of them together, laughing and talking, and my heart fills with gratitude. I have a family that makes me believe that, despite everything I went through, it's possible to start over and be happy again. And what about Guillermo? He is part of the past. Justice may not have come in the way I expected, but it did come. He ended up in jail because of his own choices and is now facing the consequences of his actions. What happened with Marta was not something I wished for, but it showed me that he hadn't changed, that his destructive behavior would end up hurting anyone close to him. And for that, I felt some relief. I felt that time is indeed fair and that, in the end, everyone reaps what they sow. Today, there is no more room for the past in my life. I have everything I need: a safe home, a loving and respectful partner, and a child growing up surrounded by love. I rebuilt myself, moved on, and am living the life I always deserved. And that, for me, is more than enough.